Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be talking about your art history project. So the objective of this project is to pick an art period to research and identify and explain the most important characteristics of the art movement, the historical events of the time period, and a few key artists and artworks from the period. The overarching goal of this is to find and be able to discern sources that are reputable. This basically means that we're going to find sources that are credible using the internet. So to begin with, I'm going to model what this might look like when you're working. So first off, we're going to pick an art period. So to do this, I started off Googling it like most people. So I Googled art periods, and you could pick any of these basic things. You could also go to Wikipedia to find ideas of what you might want to research. For the purposes of this demonstration, I chose pop art. So the second step is to do the research. When you're doing this, there's 4 things to keep in mind and consider. 1, the website's ending. This will give you a good indication of the credibility of the source. It's not always the case, but it's a good hint. So .com, that's a commercial website, whereas .org is either an organization website or a website made by anyone. There's less restrictions. So be wary of choosing a website as a source if it ends in .org. I know there are some exceptions, but it's good to just consider it. .edu and .gov are always good and reputable sources because they're either educational institutions or government published. The second thing to keep in mind is who's writing the material, the author or the publisher. So everyone has biases, and we want to keep that in mind when we're researching. For instance, if for some reason you're researching pens, if you're just reading information from a author who's works for Bic, then you probably aren't getting the whole side of the story. I know this is not illustration, but everyone has their bias, and you want to consider that so that when you're researching, you're getting the whole side of the story. Another good thing is to look at their credentials. It's always better to read information from professionals than amateurs. Another thing to consider is when your source was published. This is more important for scientific research and things of that nature, but it's relevant. It is something to think about. You want to make sure that the information you're reading is still up to date, that it's not been refuted already if it's like 15 years old. We want to keep it a little more current. The last thing to consider is whether or not it's Wikipedia. I would strongly caution you from using Wikipedia as a main source because Wikipedia it's just not reputable. Anyone can publish on it. However, there is a purpose for Wikipedia. For instance, if we go to the pop art for Wikipedia, what I would use Wikipedia for is to think of topics. It gives you the overarching ideas within the pop art, so you can find artists you might want to look up, but don't use it as a source. Another thing you can use is the references at the bottom. They typically have their references. It's like a bibliography, and you could look up these resources to maybe use those as your source of learning. See, this might be a better choice than Wikipedia. Something to keep in mind. Another option for researching is Google Scholar. So this is a good option if you want information written by professionals or in books, and you don't have access to an academic database. So let's look up something, pop art. Alright, so this gives us a wide range of books and citations For our purposes, I don't really need patents or citations, but it'll give us a bunch of different types of sources. So this has a book. You might want to use a portion of this for your research. You might not. A cool thing about Google Scholar is you can choose, you can set a time period to filter out some of the outdated material or older material. So if I wanted to go since 2015, that got rid of a lot of things, and I can just look at more new information. All right. So as you're working as you're researching, you'll probably use a normal search engine like Bing or Google. So as we're looking here, if I was researching pop art, I would Google it or use it in Bing, and say I want to use Britannica. This is a pretty good source for our purposes. We're just wanting to know a general information about your art history period, but this would give me a lot of information, general stuff, which fits the purposes of this research paper. There's also things like the history of pop art.co. You'll notice that both of these are .com sites, so they're a little more trustworthy. In this one, remember, we might want to consider the author, and when we look at this person, Beth Gershnesik, is the founder and director of the New York Art Exchange. So she's a very reputable source for to get information about art. She teaches it, so I would bet that her information is pretty reliable. So as you're researching, just keep it in mind. Ask the questions: what's the website ending, who published it, the date of publication. Just consider these things as you're researching. Make sure to cite your sources, and you should be pretty good to go. Just a recap of the objective: we're going to pick an art period, identify and explain 3 things: the characteristics of the movement, the historical events, and the key artists and artworks from the period. Remember, pick good sources. That's the major goal of this research project. It's to learn how to research and to keep the things we've talked about in mind. Thanks and good luck!